Okay, so next we have Aida Ramezani speaking about the emergence of moral foundations in child language development.
So hi everyone, my name is Aida Ramezani. I'm a PhD student at the University of Toronto, and today I'm going to present our work, The Emergence of Moral Foundations in Child Language Development. So the main question that we're asking in our paper is, when do different moral foundations emerge in child development? And to answer to this question, we have to see what the moral foundations are. And to answer to this question, we can look at the moral foundations theory, which is a well-established theory in moral psychology. And this theory suggests that our moral judgments are intuitive and they're driven by 5 core moral foundations, which are care and harm, fairness and cheating, authority and subversion, loyalty, betrayal, and purity and degradation. So as you see, each foundation involves 2 polarities that could represent its positive and negative aspects. In order to answer to our question, psychologists have conducted many experiments in conceptual development of morality. On the other hand, there are many computational work on textual analysis of moral sentiment inference that suggests that language could be a window to our morals. So we extend this notion and rephrase our problem into asking, when do different moral foundations emerge in child speech? So in this work, we're going to be looking at when children use moral vocabulary to express their moral concerns. So work on conceptual development of morality provides an estimated timeline for the development of different moral foundations in children. And what these studies typically do is that they look for signs in children's behavior that could indicate they have developed a sensitivity or expectation for morality. For example, sensitivity to care and harm has been observed in infants as young as 5 months old. These children have a preference for prosocial and helping activities and agents instead of antisocial activities or antisocial agents. Expectation for fairness has been observed after 10 months of old. So children typically have a preference for a fair distribution of resources versus an unfair distribution of resources. Authority and subversion have been observed kind of later, typically in the 2nd year of life. Loyalty and betrayal might emerge and develop even later than that, as children would, for example, in the 4th year of life, attribute positive adjectives to loyal members of a group and negative adjectives to the disloyal members of a group. Unfortunately, for purity and degradation, we didn't find any study that explores its emergence or development throughout childhood, but some scholars have suggested that these stress-related reactions might actually emerge even later in children. So there are some limitations with the conceptual developmental work, in addition to purity missing from this timeline. So for example, these studies take place in control setting for every individual moral foundation, so they cannot provide a comprehensive account of the development of all of them in the same experimental setting. And also, there's no clear distinction between positive and negative foundations in a coherent analysis. So as I said, yes, there are some studies that explore the differences between children's reaction to a fair distribution or an unfair distribution for loyal members versus disloyal members. But again, they differ in many methodological details, making it difficult for a coherent analysis of development of different polarities for morality. So these limitations kind of motivated us to use a combination of computational and experimental means to study the emergence of all moral foundations in children in naturalistic settings. So we study all moral foundations to address the case of purity missing and the lack of distinction between positive and negative polarities. And in naturalistic settings, actually in speech, to address the control settings taking place in the previous studies. We have 2 hypotheses for the development of moral foundations in child speech. The first hypothesis is that the emerging order of moral foundations in child speech it mirrors the order of more conceptual development, which is the timeline that we saw earlier. And the order is as care, fairness, authority, loyalty, and as you see, purity is missing from the timeline. I should also mention that care and fairness are known as individualizing foundations. Authority, loyalty, and purity are known as the binding foundations. And this hypothesis is rooted in the view that child conceptual development and linguistic development are closely related. Our second hypothesis is that the emerging order of moral foundations in child speech follows the order in which caretakers communicate moral foundations in the linguistic environment. And so the order provided or suggested by this hypothesis could be similar or different to the previous one, meaning that they're not orthogonal, but they could be different. And this is also motivated by the studies showing that child-directed speech has a substantial influence on children's language acquisition. So for our data set of child speech, we collected 44 text corpora from ChildS, which is one of the largest public databases of child speech in naturalistic settings. So this database contains text transcripts of conversations taking place between children and their caretakers. So child speech is denoted as CS, caretaker speech or child-directed speech is denoted as CDS in this database and in our analysis. Now, to find the moral language in ChildS, we use Moral Foundations Dictionary as our base lexicon. So this dictionary includes around 2,000 English words in total under different moral foundations. So to give you an example of the word rescue here, is a word from Moral Foundations Dictionary categorized under the care moral foundation. And a caretaker could say a sentence like, we must rescue him. And you see that they're using this word rescue in a conversation toward the child. And so in our analysis, we would be counting the utterances in ChildS that include a word from Moral Foundations Dictionary. And so as I said, a simple methodology to study the emergence of moral foundations in child speech is to count the raw frequency of moral words in each moral foundation in the ChildS database. There are two problems with this approach. The first problem is that a lot of the words could be polysemous or have multiple meanings. I guess a famous example of that is for the word fair. A child could say science fair, but they're actually referring to a science exhibition. And counting this occurrence of fair as an example or a case of moral language usage could actually overestimate the results. The second problem is that, again, a lot of the words could occur in morally irrelevant contexts, like equal numbers. Again, using the word equal here is not, so it's not being used to express any concerns for social equality or social fairness. To address these questions, our solution consists of two steps. The first step is the automatic clustering of moral foundations, and the second step is human annotation to identify morally relevant clusters. So in the first step, our goal is to cluster sentences in ChildS based on their semantic similarity. And to do so, we find the utterances in ChildS that included the word for each moral foundation. For example, if the foundation is care, then the sentences would be something like, somebody help me, come help me, mommy, I'm going to the store with mom, and something like, I love you too. We would convert these sentences into their vector representation into a semantic space. We use sentence spirit for that. And we feed these vectors into a Gaussian mixture model for clustering, so that semantically similar sentences like somebody help me and come help me would end up in the same cluster. Now, the problem is reduced to distinguishing between clusters that contain morally relevant sentences and clusters that contain morally irrelevant sentences. To do so, we use human annotation of morally relevant clusters, and we create a survey, and we use 20 utterances from each cluster in the survey, and we ask participants whether a sentence like a child saying, "But it's not real, it doesn't hurt you," was this sentence uttered in a morally relevant or morally irrelevant context. And if the participants decided that the sentence was like uttered in a morally relevant context, we ask what are the moral foundations that the child or the caretaker is trying to express within this sentence. So after gathering the annotations from around 300 participants and removing the answers and utterances and running some attention mechanism tasks, we use the majority vote to find the morally relevant clusters and morally irrelevant clusters. And then we removed all the utterances or sentences from morally irrelevant clusters and not counting them as examples of moral vocabulary usage in a morally relevant context by either the child or the caretaker. So now, before going into the results of our experiment, I want to quickly remind you of our hypothesis. So the first hypothesis is that the emerging order of moral foundations in child speech mirrors the order of moral conceptual development, meaning that children start to use more vocabulary to express their moral concerns in the same order that they conceptually develop the sensitivity to these moral foundations. And the second hypothesis is that the emerging order of moral foundations in child speech follows the order in which caretakers communicate these moral foundations in the linguistic environment and in their speech and conversations to the children. So this slide is one of our primary results. The x-axis is the age of the child. The y-axis is the normalized frequencies of morally relevant sentences for each moral foundation. Regarding our first hypothesis, we see that the moral conceptual development, the order of moral conceptual development is indeed mirrored in the emerging order of moral foundations in child speech, and the order is as care, fairness, purity, authority, and loyalty. And as you see, purity is the third most expressed moral foundation, at least in the conversations that children have with their caretakers. And you also see a clear dominance of individualizing moral foundations, which are care and fairness, over the binding ones, which are purity, authority, and loyalty. We also see that care and harm are already represented in child speech from age 1. Fairness in cheating gets more than 2% of representation in moral language used by children only after age 2, but they have a gradual rise by the age of 6. Authority and subversion kind of are seen significantly only after age 3. Loyalty and betrayal get to that point only after age 4. Regarding our second hypothesis, the overall emerging order of moral foundations is similar in child speech and caretaker speech or child-directed speech, but there are some discrepancies between the two. For example, degradation is more accentuated than purity in child-directed speech, and this could be because of a caretaker's effort to emphasize in this foundation to prevent children from being involved in discussion-related matters that might not be highly perceivable by them. For fairness and cheating, we see that they're relatively constant in caretaker speech, but they tend to grow over time. In child speech, also cheating is more expressed by children, while fairness is more expressed by caretakers. And again, this could be due to caretakers' effort to teach the quality of being fair to children. We also see similar cases of the degree of representation and expression in moral language and their differences between child speech and caretaker speech, meaning that caretakers tend to focus on more like intricate dimensions of morality, like authority, subversion, degradation, while children mainly focus on care, harm, fairness, and cheating. We repeated our experiments controlling for child gender, and the results remain robust both for child-directed speech and child speech. And finally, we evaluated our results using the whole corpus, which includes sociodemographic information about the families of children. So this information includes the race of the families and the social classes of the families. And we see that the overall patterns are similar between families of different social classes and races. In all of the cases, care and harm are the first most expressed moral foundations in child speech, followed by fairness and cheating, followed by degradation. We also see that fairness is again more expressed by caretakers, while cheating is more expressed in child speech. Degradation is also noticeably more expressed in child-directed speech, but it's almost non-existent. In child speech, in this data set, so although this data set is independent from our previous experiments, but the results remain robust for different social classes and races. And to conclude, we extended the prior work toward a comprehensive account of developmental origins of moral foundations. In naturalistic settings, we showed that the individualizing moral foundations emerge early in the binding foundations, and child speech and caretaker speech differ in both aspects of fairness and purity they emphasize. So with that, my presentation is over, and thanks for listening. I would be happy to hear your questions.
There's a question in the chat. Thank you for your fascinating talk. How would you explain the link between CDS and CS? Do you think that parents are scaffolding moral development? And if so, how do parents know that what the correct order is? Or is it possible that parents mirror the children's natural development in their speech?
That's a very interesting question. Thanks for asking. I'm not sure whether parents know the conceptual developments. Actually, let me go to the slides for the timeline. Okay. So I don't think that caretakers might know this conceptual development, but in their speech, we see that the same emerging order. And my guess is probably because there are more concerns for these foundations over time. So if you look at the results section, we see that fairness and cheating are relatively more expressed at age 1, but there is a decrease in caretakers' expression of these moral foundations. And my guess is that because children, according to this conceptual development of moral foundations, like in their second year of life, is the year that probably they have developed some expectations for these moral foundations. So there is probably a lesser need for the parents to emphasize on them. But that's my guess. And I think this might explain the emerging order. But yeah, thank you for the question.
There's another in-chat question that says, this is such impressive work. I've wanted to conduct similar work for the past decade, but haven't found a good method, and you landed on such a great approach. This is from Josh Rotman. In the case of purity, it's interesting to see so much child-directed speech, given that a lot of purity concerns that are discussed in the literature are adult-themed, for example, sex-related. Do you have a sense for the kinds of issues that adults were discussing with kids? And a second question, if there's time. In the child speech, do you think there is a competence and performance gap for loyalty and authority?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think for the case of purity, a lot of the cases that we saw in our annotations, we saw that they were really much germ related or dirt related, and they were not much so like sex related or like adult content related. And there's, I think, an argument about the case of purity and degradation. I've seen a lot of debates going on whether these discussions about dirtiness and cleanliness should actually be included in the purity and degradation moral foundations or not. But according to our annotators and the RA survey that we also gathered, but it's not included in the paper, we see that people tend to agree that these discussions about the dirtiness of things and keeping the body clean should actually be included in the purity and degradation moral foundation. And yeah, I think, yeah.
Thanks. Okay.